You have studied the Labor Bureau data on the recent spurt in rural wage growth, that is March
Hmm.
2026, and you have spotted some anomalies also. Can you tell me
Yes.
more about this?
For the month of March, there is a surge in the wage growth for rural households. It surged to almost like 17 odd percent. And
Okay.
we are used to seeing levels around 5 to 6%. And we were quite surprised to see that they told us is that they have actually shifted the way they are doing sampling. We found that for the 10 odd states, the proportion of rural workers and population is less than 1.5% of the total India population and workforce. Giving them a 11% weightage essentially created a kind of a distortion in the overall sample.
Hello and welcome to Macro Decode. India is the fastest growing large economy. The citizens of the country benefit from the growth of the economy when their real wages also grow at a similar pace. In the past several years, we have been seeing a major disconnect between the country's growth and wage growth. However, the Labor Bureau data for March 2026 showed a sudden spurt in rural wage growth, which came as a surprise for the experts who have been tracking the trends. To throw more light on wage growth trends and the recent spurt, we have Dhananjay Sinha, CEO and co-head of institutional equities at Systematix Group. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Sangeeta.
Before we start talking about the recent data, I think we should first talk about the broader trends in wage growth in the past 10 years. India is the fastest growing large economy, as we said earlier. Theoretically, this growth should translate into strong real wage growth. How has been the real wage growth in the past 10 years, sir?
I would say that there is no authentic data at an overall level with respect to the household income situation and also the wage situation. So we derive it from multiple sources. A
Hmm.
good source is essentially the periodic labor survey that the government has recently started. So after 2018, there has been a restructuring of the PLFS survey. The earlier survey had shown that the unemployment rate had gone up to a 45-year high of
Okay.
6.1%. Following
Right.
that, there has been a sort of a disquiet relating to that number. And
Right.
following that, there has been a change in the overall structure of the survey that the government has been doing. If you look at the PLFS survey, with about 95 to 96% of the population who are working, the
Hmm.
overall wage growth has roughly been stagnant over the last 6 7 years,
Right.
and more so for the rural side, there has been a net of inflation. There has been a contraction as well. As
Right.
far as the formal sector earnings are concerned, we can look at the data coming from the income tax. The average income is roughly about 8,40,000 a year, and over the last 10, 12 years, it has grown at roughly about 6 odd percent. And if you set out the inflation, which has been
Right.
averaging about 5.5% over the last 10, 11 years, it is roughly about 1% or thereabout, 1.5%. So if you look at the formal sector, we find that it has been fairly modest in terms of the overall growth. There has been a sort of structural change in terms of the occupation structure as well. The contribution of the formal manufacturing and the formal services sector, the contribution of that in the employment is actually reduced, whereas the dependence on self-employment and significantly in the agriculture sector has actually increased. So people are resorting to also informal services. So overall, I would say that while in the formal sector there has been an improvement in productivity with the advent of technology, automation, etc. So the people
Right.
who are employed there have improved in terms of the overall wage growth. But most of the people who are who are not benefiting from the productivity gains in the formal sector have actually seen real wages actually stagnating or declining as well.
So, what do you think could be the main reason of this kind of a stagnant wage growth, whereas we are actually growing in terms of the economy?
So if you look at the if you look at the overall economy, it is shown to be growing at something like 7 to 8%. That's not really reflected in the overall household situation. This is happening because there are certain issues with respect to the measurement of the GDP itself. If you look at the revised GDP base, which is 2022-23, there has been a scaling down of the nominal GDP, particularly relating to household consumption. It has been brought down by roughly about 10% over the 4 years ending 2026. Consumption expenditure has been brought down by roughly about 80 lakh crores. And
Oh,
if the consumption has been brought down, which means income is also coming down. So
right.
the GDP data, while it is showing a very robust headline number, if you look at the granularity within the GDP numbers itself and also then relate to the survey data that are available, the coherence is not there. So it's incoherent, and essentially we'll have to really look at a lot of other data to really understand what is happening to the household wages and income.
So you have studied about the Labor Bureau data on the recent spurt in rural wage growth, that is March
Hmm.
2026, and you have
Hmm.
spotted some anomalies also. Can you tell me
Yes.
more about this?
For the month of March, there is a surge in the wage growth for rural households.
Mm.
It surged to almost like 17 odd percent, and
Okay.
we are used to seeing levels around 5 to 6%. So we were quite surprised to see that. So we looked at the long term data. We found that in June, July 2025, there has been a jump of roughly about 12.5, 13% on a month on month basis.
Mhm.
And there was no explanation that was given by the Labor Bureau from where the data
Okay.
comes. So we called up Labor Bureau after several calls to the Calcutta office and also to the Chandigarh office. What they told us is that they have actually shifted the way they are doing sampling. What it effectively does is to really expand the number of villages across the India, almost like
Okay.
touching 900. There is an addition of roughly about 180 villages. The number of states have also been increased from 20 to all over the India, all over India. There has been a significant addition of northeastern state which are not represented earlier.
Oh,
We have also seen Goa and Delhi being added. Now, what we found is that there is a disproportionate allocation in terms of weights to these 10 states and union territories. There has been a 11% weight that has been given to them, and it has
okay.
taken away from states that are more populous, who have higher rural proportion in their economy.
Okay.
Whereas we found that for these 10 odd states, the proportion of rural workers and population is less than 1.5% of the total India population and workforce. So giving them a 11% weightage essentially created a kind of a distortion in the overall sample. And
Okay.
these states and union territories have higher wages, on average roughly about 50 to 55%. Some
Okay.
states such as Kerala, Delhi and Goa have almost like 100% higher wages. So
Right.
essentially what it does is to really shift up the average wage. For instance, for June of 2025, from 454 to July at 511. So there's almost like a 12 to 13% jump that has happened. As a
Okay.
result of all that, there is a 17% growth for the month of March. But importantly, we found that the actual wage growth is roughly about 4%, and it has decelerated from roughly about 6 odd percent. And what is also important is that on a month on month basis, the average wage growth is just about 0.18% for the months of February and March, which means de facto the growth is roughly about 2.5%. There is a considerable slowdown as far as the wage growth is concerned in the recent times. And whatever government and RBI has done with respect to stimulus through GST reduction, income tax reduction, or the liquidity infusion that RBI has done has not
Hmm.
really impacted the broader economy, particularly the rural income and wages.
Did you point out to the officials this is a kind of anomaly? What was their response?
They're saying that this is because of the change in the sampling. The past series is not really comparable with the new series because they have actually expanded the coverage in terms of states and villages, and
Okay.
also that they have made some finer changes in terms of their coverage of occupations. India would have roughly about uh, you know. Uh, 160,000 villages. We are considering about 900 villages, and within the change in the sample, we are giving very high weightage to states that have low agriculture or rural population. So I think that also is an aberration, and I think that's a flaw.
So when we look at rural growth, we have been talking earlier about like how the rural wage growth has been stagnant, but we are now facing two major headwinds. There is an inflation induced by the West Asia crisis, and then we have the below normal monsoons coming. And how will these affect the real wages growth this year?
In the context of the war that has erupted in the Middle East, there has been a significant increase in LPG prices. Overall,
Right.
fuel prices have gone up. There is shortage of LPG. Informally, the LPG prices have gone up by 4 to 5 times. Given the stagnancy in the urban wages, especially for people who are informally employed, especially in the casual work categories, the the sustainability is actually getting challenged. And as a result of which, workers have actually reverse migrated from urban areas to rural areas. I think the reverse migration has been happening earlier as well, particularly after the COVID. That has actually increased the dependency of workers on agriculture furthermore. As a result of this, the labor employed per hectare of agriculture land would actually increase, which means the productivity will decrease even further. That's a downside pressure on wages. And secondly, with the El Nino effect this year, there can be a additional pressure on the rural wages and income. If the current scenario continues, and as IMD has said, there will be a 8% shortfall in the monsoon versus the long period average, then it can induce a significant pressure on the rural income and the economy as a whole, which means the government will need to address this in a urgent manner.
Right. Recent surveys point to corporate profits growing faster than employee compensation. We are seeing this kind of a trend even during the COVID times where the corporate profits have been going up. Is India's growth becoming increasingly focused on capital rather than labor now?
I would say the unemployment problem was there in 2013-14 as well. And I think that was one point on which the change in government happened. The mandate was that there will be increase in employment. A new government promised 2 crores job each year. There has been a persistence of the unemployment problem over the last 12 years or so. And that reflects in the fact that there is a sort of a moderation in income. It has actually been impacting consumption demand as well. The weakness in demand has also reflected in the slowdown as private sector capex is concerned. Because of this, there is a sort of a lowering of inflation because the demand has been weak, and also the current account deficit has been also narrowing. Whereas at the policy level, this is considered to be a virtuous situation, but behind the headline numbers is the deceleration in the overall demand, and that impacting the private capex as well. So I think this is a major macro transmission that has been happening over the last 12 years. So the top line growth of companies is what determines how companies deploy capital and also labor. As the sales growth comes down, the payment towards compensation also decelerates along with it. But companies have been using more cost optimization, using technology, automation, digitization, etc., to improve profitability. As a result of which, there has been a significant capital deepening that is happening, and as a result of which, labor has increasingly becoming redundant. So, and that reflects in the structural shift more in favor of the rural employment or low quality employment. Overall, I would say that profits have actually improved because of the adoption of technology and capital deepening, whereas sales growth continues to be on the weakening side, and that sort of has a relationship with the wage growth and the income growth for the formal sector.
Right. So that means we are seeing the consumption actually getting hit by the wage growth. So if wage growth is lagging behind corporate profitability, will it also come down at one point of time? Can an economy sustain high growth rate if workers' purchasing power does not improve?
Yeah, so I think it is a spiral. You cannot sort of continue to support your profits just on the basis of capital deepening. You need
Right.
to increase in scale, and that comes with higher sales growth. And higher sales growth can come with higher income growth and higher wage growth. So I would say that clearly we are heading into a low growth equilibrium. In terms of policy responses, if you look at last year, the government had actually rationalize the income tax for households because there was a concern regarding the middle class spending. So there was a GST rationalization. RBI had actually reduced policy rates by 125%, infused liquidity of roughly about 14 to 15 lakh crores through OMOs, dollar swap, etc. But it has not really permeated to a broader level of recovery. And if you compare it against 2012-13 for the urban households, I think it has barely recovered over the last 5-6 years. After the COVID, has been a consistent slowdown in allocation for the rural sector with respect to food subsidy, allocation to Manrega, or even for the Ministry of Agriculture.
Right. Yeah. So the government has to realize that we will get into a vicious circle where, the demand comes down, the consumption comes down because the wages growth is not happening. And
Right.
then, that would eventually affect the companies where the sales will actually slow down. And this will in turn affect the economy's growth. So
Yes.
we need to actually tackle with the wage growth at this point of time. Otherwise, we would probably get into that vicious cycle. Yeah. So also need to talk about income disparity in the country. How has the income disparity increased in the recent years?
There has been a certain claims, especially based on the household consumption expenditure survey. They have actually uh, consistently pointed that there has been reduction in the inequality in the economy. So
Right.
actual scenario might quite be different and paradoxical. The claim about reduction in disparity was prior to the revision of the GDP number. So in the new base of 22-23 of 2022-23, there has been a scaling down of the total consumption by roughly about 80 lakh crores for the period between FY23 to FY26. We do not have comparable data prior to 22-23 because there is a discontinuity in terms of the survey. So it's quite possible that the GDP numbers from a consumption standpoint will also need to be scaled down for prior years as well. The inequality has actually risen in the formal sector itself. So if you have a context where real wages constant or kind of declining in the rural areas and self-employed, it is quite inconsistent to claim such robustness as far as the inequality reduction is concerned. A study by Piketty and other co-authors have come up with a paper which shows that the inequality level could be as high as it was in the British Raj. So I think there is a considerable counterclaims. Official claims appear to be more robust, whereas granular data and studies and more serious research basically shows that there has been a rise in income disparity in a context where the wages has actually been stagnant or decreasing for a large portion of the society.
Right. So, lastly, as we are seeing, artificial intelligence is coming into several sectors. The jobs would also probably be displaced, many of them. In such a scenario, would we see further concentration of wealth in few hands and the income disparity actually widening?
Of course, the capital deepening thing that we talked about earlier
Yeah.
essentially ensures that the profitability is actually protected. So usage of AI in the corporate world and in manufacturing services sector essentially is also an enabler to ensure that profitability is protected. So I think that's
Right.
a broad thing that is happening across segments. And in the Indian case, I would say we have seen that digitization is already been impacting a lot of sectors. Clearly we have seen that the market capitalization of Indian IT industry as a ratio of US market cap has actually been decreasing over the last 15 years or thereabout. Cloud computing, digitization, and then more recently in artificial intelligence, those are the segments which Indian IT companies have not really been able to scale as much as what is happening globally. A lot of these AI investment that the hyperscalers are doing in the US are actually spent within the US. It's not translating into outsourcing.
Right.
That has any bearing on the earnings growth and the top line growth of IT companies. That is already showing up
Right.
in their performance.
overall, if you look at, the wage growth has been remaining stagnant, though we have seen a spurt in one of the data that has been coming out from the government. But largely, wage growth has been stagnant, and this will obviously start affecting sales as well as the growth of the economy. The first thing is to have robust data, which will help you in right policies, and right policies will help the growth. The government has to realize this, otherwise, probably we will get into a vicious cycle. Thank you for joining me on the show, sir.
Thank you, Sunil.